Hi guys, and welcome back to Betwixt the Books. This is my 2024 reading wrap-up because today is New Year's, so Happy New Year's, everyone. Um, Gretchen did her, best and worst books on Monday, so if you want to hear her favorite reads and least favorite reads of the year, please go and check out that video. I'm going to do the same thing today. I'm also going to talk a little bit about, my reading goals for the year and how that went. But I think I'll start it off with my best and worst, just like she did. I wound up having 4 5-star reads and 2 4.75-star reads. So I'm going to talk about those 6 books. And then I only had 2 books that were under 3 stars. So I'll talk about those as my 2 worst reads of the year. The vast majority of my reading was somewhere in the 3-star range. I believe overall I read 28 books out of my goal of 20. So I beat my goal of 20. 11 of my 28 books were 3 stars exactly. 2 books under that, and then the rest were over 3 stars. And then 10 of the books that I read all year, I read in December. So if that gives you sort of an idea of how my reading year went, a third of the books that I read were read this month. In no particular order, I'm going to talk about these 5-star books. The first one, if you watch Gretchen's videos, you will have already heard, but that is Lay Them to Rest by Laura Norton. This is the only nonfiction book that I rated 5 stars this year, although I did read more nonfiction than I normally do. This is a book about cold cases, specifically Jane Doe / John Doe unknown victim cold cases. I feel like this is a great true crime book for people who aren't super versed in true crime. She goes into a lot of detail when it comes to the science behind how we identify remains in the anthropology field and what we do in order to find families. She's super respectful of the victims in this. There was a lot of time and space given to who the victim that they ended up identifying was in life, which you don't see very often. Usually it's much more focused on the killer or the death itself, and she made sure to spend a good amount of time letting you know who this person was before the death, because that's not the defining feature of this person's life. It just happens to be what the last several years have been, being a cold case. Laura also has a podcast, so if you like this book and you're a true crime person, you can always go to the podcast to see that. But yes, 5 stars, Lay Them to Rest by Laura Norton. We did a video of this together too, which I can link up above, and you can go and see my thoughts on that one. Another jointly read book that I rated 5 stars is How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu. This is a collection of short stories. There's an Arctic plague which has been unearthed because of climate change. Obviously, this has begun ravaging the nation, and each story sort of focuses on different people who can be more or less connected to the other people in the stories that were coming before it, and sort of how we react to what's going on. This is a very emotionally difficult book to read. It took Gretchen and I at least 3 months to finish reading it, and then we didn't do just one video, we did 2 videos, including a 2.5 hour long video where we went story by story and talked about breaking down what the story was and the importance of it and the themes that were going through it. This is one of my favorite books of the year, full stop. Maybe one of my favorite books of all time at this point now. Highly recommend this one. I will link the spoiler free, just our overall reviews that we did, so that you can go and see what we thought of that. But again, there is also a really long video where we break down every single section of this book as well. My next choice is The Employees by Olga Raven. It was translated by Martin Aitken. This is a tiny little thing. I read it for my Rainbow Reading Challenge, which is reading my TBR books, my owned books off of my shelves by color. This is a tiny little sci-fi story. It's also literary, told through employee interviews of these employees who work on this spaceship. After specific weird objects have been found on a planet to see if the objects are positively or negatively impacting the employees, while there is also a rift between basically android employees and the human employees on the ship as well. I loved this one. It made me want to break out the highlighters and like track certain things throughout it. It is not told like sequentially, like you're not going like interview 1, interview 2, interview 3. You're like jumping around a little bit and you never know exactly who the interviewee is. So sometimes it's made obvious whether it's a human or if it's an android. Sometimes it's kind of not obvious which one it is. I think that's part of the point of the book. I compared this one to Orbital in my little mini reviews where I talked about a couple of the books that I was reading for this Rainbow Reading Challenge. And I liked this one way better than Orbital. So yes, if you're a person who read and liked Orbital, I feel like you'll really like this one. Or if you didn't like Orbital, but you want something kind of similar in theme, this might be a good choice for you. I almost filmed this video on Monday, but I was still reading a couple of things for my Rainbow TBR challenge. And I'm glad that I held off because I wouldn't have been able to talk about How Long Till Black Future Month by N.K. Jemisin, which was one of the very last books that I read in the year. Actually, it was the very last book that I read in the year, so there we go. This is a bunch of speculative short stories. It is Afrofuturist. I gave this one 5 stars. I want to say this might be the first short story collection I've given 5 stars. It's so rare that I enjoy every single story in a short story collection. I feel like this is one of those ones where the plots are all interesting, but also the characters all feel very real, even though you're just interacting with them for a very brief amount of time. I felt like they were fully realized humans. One of the downsides of reading short fiction is that you don't really get to like interact with a character for very long. And I feel like even though we only saw like these short little snippets of these worlds and these interactions, I really felt like I knew these people and like what they stood for, what was going on in their lives. Highly recommend this one. I know a lot of people recommend the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin, but if you're like a little bit intimidated by the size of like doing a trilogy of books, maybe dipping into some of N.K. Jemison's short fiction might be a good option for you before jumping into something like as large and daunting as a trilogy might be. The next 2 books are the 2 books that I rated 4.75 stars, the first of which is Saha by Cho Nam-ju. This is translated from Korean by Jamie Chang. This was written by the same author who wrote Kim Ji-young, born 1982, which is like quite a popular text this past year. I feel like it was getting brought up again, especially with the like rise in popularity of the 4B movement or the knowledge of the 4B movement in America. Like that Korean movement here in the States. People were being told about and learned about it. This is also by that same author. It is focused less on feminism, although there is a little bit of that there. This one is more focused on class. It is set on an island where everybody is sort of ranked into 3 tiers. The citizens who are the top tier, then you get sort of like a B rank citizen who can work specific jobs, are clearly trying to work their way up to being the top tier citizen, and then the Sahas, which are the poorest folks who live in a bunch of apartments called the Saha apartments, and they basically work under the table. This one focuses a lot on like who's actually in charge of where money goes and who's allowed to be a citizen, and how anybody is like one bad day away from falling literally to the bottom of the ladder, and that once you have fallen that far, it is near impossible to change your status. I really enjoyed this one. Obviously, I gave it 4.75 stars. I think the thing that kept it from being a 5 was like the ending felt very unsatisfying to me, and maybe that was purposeful. But at least like from my perspective, it kind of dampened my enjoyment of this a little bit to the point where it was 4.75 instead of 5, but still highly recommended. The only other nonfiction book on this list is a collection of essays called It Came from the Closet, Queer Reflections on Horror by Joe Velisi. This was also read for my Rainbow TBR challenge. As you would expect, it's a bunch of essays written by queer folks about their experiences relating to horror movies. So some of the essays will focus on more than one, but it's usually one horror movie in particular, and the way that that author really enjoyed it or related to it in one way or another. I found it endlessly fascinating how often queer folks related more so to the monsters than they did to the villains. And yeah, I just highly recommend it. I don't think you need to be queer to get something out of this, or even necessarily to really like horror movies, although it helps to understand sort of what they're talking about. Most of these essays do a pretty good job of letting you know why that particular movie was poignant to them and discussing the plot points that are relevant to their essay. So I don't think you need to know the movies to be able to read this one, but it was definitely interesting. Yeah, highly recommend this one if you're looking for some essays to dip into, especially if you're like a horror person or LGBTQ plus. So those were my highly rated books. My two lowest rated books. One was rated 2.5 stars. That one is one that I read on Kindle. It is called Jinxed by Tori Heat. I read it for the video that I did over the summer where I was reading books that I saw like the author's promo of on TikTok. I was not the biggest fan of that one. It was like a reverse harem type story where a woman buys this abandoned house, but as soon as she gets inside of it, she learns that anybody who gets into this house is trapped inside of the house. They don't age, they're just there. So there are these three men who, the original owner of the house, and then two men who have different times in history also broken into the house, who are all trapped there. It's a romance book, so they all begin to have a relationship. I had some issues with the way that worked. The interpersonal relationships between these people, they felt kind of flat, like each of them was just a caricature of a man. Like none of these characters really felt like they had much to them. So it was not my favorite romance book that I read, but it was an indie pub and it wasn't super horrible. But yeah, 2.5 stars, not my favorite. I don't really recommend it. The biggest surprise, and I believe this was the biggest surprise for Gretchen as well, was that my lowest rated book was actually Dark Restraint by Katie Robert. This is the 7th Dark Olympus book. I rated it 1.5 stars. The big surprise with this one for both Gretchen and I was the lack of consent consistently throughout this book that made it impossible for us to root for these two to fall in love with each other. It opened with a lack of consent. There is a certain amount of naivete to the heroine in this one, and for a good amount of this book, she doesn't have full faith that the love interest here isn't going to kill her. When we reviewed this one, we talked a little bit about how my favorite of the Dark Olympus books has a similar trope where the male love interest in that one is also supposed to be a killer, but at no point during that book did I feel like he was actually going to harm the heroine, and she stopped believing that he was going to harm her like pretty much by chapter 3. That's not the same thing in this one. This one, that fear goes quite far, and there's a lot of manipulation. And while we agree that this series is Dark Olympus, this is the first one that felt dark in the this relationship is toxic way. So I know some people will really enjoy that, who enjoy toxic romances, but from Gretchen and I, we were just really shocked to see the like sheer lack of consent that happened in this one, and we're not fans of it personally. So take with that what you will, but yes, I'll link the video for this one as well where we talked about it in more detail. So you've heard me mention it a couple of times. I did my Rainbow TBR challenge this year. If I switch over to here, you can see a little wrap up of the books that I read for that. I put some emojis so that you could see like which one was the highest rated of each month, which ones I would recommend or not. Those are the books that I read this year for that. If you would like to join me on that challenge, I'm going to continue doing it in 2025. I have an Instagram where I post my reviews for all of those. I will link that down below, but you can also join me on Storygraph. I made a Storygraph challenge. The general idea of the challenge is to read at least 3 books of each color each month, and each month has a different themed color. So going into January, I am reading pink books if you would like to join me. You can read more than 3, but those are there. The other sort of challenge that I set for myself last year that I didn't quite meet was to try and read one nonfiction book a month. I again didn't quite meet that, but I did do a pretty good job when it came to like the last couple months of the year, so I'm hoping to keep that going forward next year as well, where I will again try to read one nonfiction book a month, because I pick them up and I do enjoy them. I just don't generally reach for them. Most of the time when I'm reading fiction. You will note in this reading wrap up that I did not talk very much this year about fan fiction, and I haven't done a wrap up of my fan fiction this year. So I might do another video where I talk about that. Not sure yet if that's the plan, but I might do it. So yeah, you might be able to look forward to that. I don't know. I do have a plan next week to talk about my reading challenges going forward for 2025. So what my reading and bookish goals are. So if you enjoy talking about reading challenges and reading goals and stuff like that, please feel free to look forward to that one. And then if you haven't already, please subscribe, leave me a comment, let me know what your favorite book of last year was. Tell me, you know, which YouTubers I should go and check out, because I know there's like a million videos coming out right now of like the best books that everybody read this year. And that's always my favorite, to kind of see what everybody's reading. And then look forward to Friday, when I believe our wrap up of Gretchen and I's buddy reading challenge will be coming out, so you get to see what all we read for that and the videos that we did for it as well. In any case, I will see you guys soon. Talk to you then. Bye.